throughout her career as a judge, Jackson has been questioned by the Judiciary Committee more than any other Supreme Court nominee in 30 years. Let's bring in senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer, who's live in the committee room, along with ABC News political director Rick Klein. For more on this, Devin, I'll start with you. Judge Jackson, she's been here before, but never with the stakes this high. So how has she been preparing for this?
Yeah, Diane, I mean, this moment is so unique for any federal judge. 11 hours today, more than 8 hours tomorrow, 19 hours of grilling by the 22 members of the Judiciary Committee. She's been preparing for this by holding these mock sessions with White House staff, some playing the roles of senators. Of course, as you said, she's been here 3 times already. Most recently, just last year, in which a lot of members of this very committee previewed the types of questions that they will ask her today. So she, you know, by all accounts, is prepared for this. She's poised. She uses humor to disarm her critics. Today will be her first chance to respond to some of the many sort of allegations that have started to trickle out about her record, mischaracterizations of her record, according to her team. So she will bring those to the table today. But make no mistake, as prepared as she is, this is a very high-stakes moment. The impression she creates today will last in the public perception for potentially years to come if she makes it to the bench. Once those justices go behind the black curtain, they're not seen in public very often. So this is her moment. And, of course, it's also her chance, Diane, to convince some Republicans to get on board with her historic appointment, even as Democrats have the votes to bring this across the finish line on their own.
And, Rick, yesterday we got a little taste of that by hearing her opening statements, her introduction of herself. And as Devin points out, you know, once in the Supreme Court, justices tend to really they try to avoid the spotlight more than anything. So this is going to be a lasting impression. What did you think of Judge Jackson's introduction yesterday?
Well, talking about her own faith, talking about her family, her love of family, I think all of that serves her well in this kind of setting and over the longer term as well. There were 2 points that she made that I think are going to come up today and potentially beyond. One is the commitment that she made to transparency. That is a key question that a lot of the lawmakers on the panel are going to be asking. Will you tell us where you stand on this? Why did you do that? And the practice over the last few decades has been to say as little as possible, to say it artfully, to say it well, but try not to reveal anything that might get you in trouble, certainly not reveal anything that might prejudge where you stand on a case. And a lot of senators, most of these folks on the panel today are lawyers themselves. They have history questioning nominees. They know how to essentially trick someone into answering a question they don't want to. If she's committed to that value of transparency, it could actually be an issue for her. And if she isn't committed to it and she refuses to answer on key questions, that becomes an issue. And the other thing is the way that she said that she views her role as limited. That, to me, translates to I understand the concerns that you're making about an activist judiciary, and I want to do my best to assuage you that I am out there just applying the law to the facts of individual cases. Now, not all senators are going to be convinced by that. Some already have said on the Republican side that they don't believe that they think that she's become too much of an activist. But I think in terms of signaling to the committee, this is how she views her role as a judge and has for the past 10 years or so. That, I think, is a very important quality and something that senators are going to be trying to probe as much as possible.
And, Devin, in yesterday's opening statements by the Judiciary Committee, we got a preview of some of the questions senators are likely to ask. What stood out to you about that? What are you watching for?
Well, the most controversial line of questioning, Diane, came from Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee also picked up on it, and that's Judge Jackson's record on criminal sentencing when she was a district court judge, specifically in cases of child porn offenders. These were people who were convicted of possessing or viewing child pornography. In some of those cases, the 7 that Hawley listed, she sentenced the defendants to below the federal guidelines that are on the books, and we've checked those facts. That was the case in that instance, but there's been a lot of discussion about whether that was appropriate. Hawley wants her to speak and explain as to why she made those sentences. There's been a little bit of hypocrisy in this line of attack. Senator Hawley himself has previously voted to confirm federal judges who also delivered those sentences, even as he's making somewhat of a stink about her record. So today will be her chance to address that, and I think that could be the most controversial line, but we'll also hear about her defense of Gitmo detainees as a public defender, her time on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, setting guidelines, some of her cases against the Trump administration from the federal bench, which have caught the attention of Republicans. And then, as Rick was talking about, her judicial philosophy. The last time she was in this room, she told the senators, Diane, that she does not have a judicial philosophy per se. Today, they will do their very best to pin her down, to characterize how she views the law.
And Devin, how do you expect her to respond, particularly to the points that we're expecting Senator Hawley to raise? And by the way, as you were talking, we saw him walking into the room, getting settled down there, so he looks like he's ready to go. How do you expect her to respond to those allegations about her sentencing and being a lenient sentencer when it comes to some of these criminal cases, as well as the Guantanamo accusations?
Well, there's no question, Diane, they are legitimate questions to ask. A judge's record and her sentences that she delivers are fair game here in the Judiciary Committee. And so she will most likely acknowledge that. But context is important. And as we've been hearing from her team, she will lay out some of that context. In fact, 60% of sentences are below the guidelines, for example, because over time, Congress, the judiciary, including Republican judges, a number of them have come out overnight saying these guidelines need to be, revised. She'll talk a little bit about that and why there's been a discussion. She's going to say that she's not lenient on these child porn offenders. It's an insidious crime, we're told, or she will say. But she's going to have to walk a fine line about condemning the crime, explaining her sentence, and also trying to add this context to help justify why she's been in that position. Those other set of cases you talked about as a public defender, listen, she's talked about this before. That's a familiar question to her. She's going to note that her brother was in the military at the time she was defending these Gitmo detainees, accused terrorists, and she's going to make the point that no matter who you are in the American judicial system, you have a right to bring a defense, including with counsel. Diane.
And Rick, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that he trusts that Americans will see through what he called misleading broadsides from Republican members against Judge Jackson. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I think he's talking about the way that they're going to tread around race and around identity politics and around the ways that they're going to try to characterize her as kind of a stand-in for everything that Republicans view as wrong about Democratic policies. If you listen to what Republicans said yesterday about the crime wave around the country, it was an indictment of Joe Biden's America much more than it was anything about Ketanji Brown Jackson. And it's also, I think, on Senator Schumer's part, they have the votes. They know that their votes are there to lose. They're very confident that they'll be able to do this with just Democrats if necessary. They're not under any illusions about how many Republicans will join them. They view this moment as a big moment for the Democratic Party, a big moment for the country. Polls have shown that most Americans support her confirmation to the bench. That isn't going to stop Republican senators from trying to make points, to get some information out of her, and for them to start to play some 2024 politics. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that people like Senator Cotton, Senator Hawley, Senator Cruz all have potential presidential ambitions. This historically has been as big a stage as ever to perform for the Republican base. I think Senator Schumer wants to call that out early on.
So given that dynamic, Rick, not only did we hear a lot of mentions of Joe Biden yesterday, we also heard a lot of points being scored in terms of trying to point out how respectful these proceedings are going to be compared to previous Supreme Court hearings that were run by the Democratic Party. So how contentious do you think this could get, even if it is a foregone conclusion, because everybody's trying to score political points here?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, if you listened to the Republicans yesterday, Brett Kavanaugh's name came out almost as much as Ketanji Brown Jackson. When people talked about how that scorched earth campaign launched very late on the Democratic side, there's a lot of people on this committee today that are still burned by that, and the memories of that sting them. So they wanted to remind the public about that, to say they won't be doing that. But when you listen to people like Senator Hawley talk about going light on child porn offenders, when you listen to Senator Blackburn going even a step further, wondering what her her hidden agenda may be. Is her hidden agenda, she mused yesterday, to let child offenders out on the streets earlier, sex offenders out on the streets? That's pretty biting stuff. So it's not going to take on the same feel of the Kavanaugh hearings, where we talked about squee and drinking in college and all the wild accusations, many of which, most of which never proved to be validated. But that doesn't mean that this isn't going to hurt. And these are going to be tough days for Judge Jackson, just like they would be for any nominee. And I think their memories, Republicans' memories of the Kavanaugh hearings, are going to be used to wield into something of a weapon rhetorically over the next couple of days.
And we are seeing more and more of those senators coming into the hearing room now. Devin, Judge Jackson is a double graduate of Harvard University. She serves on the school's board as well. The Supreme Court is set to hear a case on Harvard's use of race in its admissions process. So how do you expect her to handle questions about whether or not she'll recuse herself or would recuse herself from that case?
Yeah, you know, Diane, I was surprised that didn't come up much yesterday in the sort of the preview to the questions today, but I'm told that the White House team is prepared for those questions today. A double graduate of Harvard, but she also sits on the Harvard Board of Overseers currently. And why that's significant is because the Supreme Court, and if she's confirmed, a Justice Jackson would hear a major case involving Harvard University this fall, and it involves race in college admissions, affirmative action. So we could see today some pretty tough questions about whether she'd recuse herself from that case, how she would decide to do that, whether it's appropriate. And it also could open the door to other questions for Judge Jackson about race, the appropriateness of using race in making decisions, and including President Biden's use of race and gender in making the selection for the Supreme Court pick, which, as we know and have talked about, some Republicans right out of the gate brought up as sort of a red flag on her nomination.
And Rick, in terms of judicial philosophy, when Amy Coney Barrett was most recently confirmed, she was pretty clear that, you know, I worked for Justice Scalia and his judicial philosophy, in a sense, is mine. She was more literal with how she thinks the Constitution should be interpreted when it comes to acting as a justice. How much will Judge Jackson be pressed on that, given how evasive she's been in trying to answer what her philosophy is in terms of whether the Constitution is to be interpreted literally or whether there's more sort of breathing room now there to interpret it?
Republicans aren't going to buy the idea that she doesn't have a judicial philosophy per se. They're going to point to her writings. They're going to point to the judges that she worked for, including the retiring Justice Breyer that she's going to be that she'd be replacing. They're going to press her very hard on it. She knows the issues. She knows how to handle it. But you heard yesterday a lot of Republican senators, several of them, saying the same thing about, I don't buy this idea of a living Constitution. I want you to talk about what the document meant at the time. I want you to talk about laws as they were passed. I don't want you to play that activist role. She's not going to embrace the idea of activism, but I think that the non-answers on that are going to be flags for Republicans and an excuse for them to vote, frankly, how they would have voted anyway, which is probably not for her nomination.
And Devin, that, I mean, really is at the heart of any Supreme Court hearing, or at least that's what the argument is that it should be. It's all about judicial philosophy and whether you agree with that judge's judicial philosophy or not. So how much do you think we're going to hear about that today?
It's going to be a delicate dance, Diane. And I mean, one of the things, and Rick alluded to this earlier, that's most frustrating to members of both parties when they're questioning a nominee from the opposite party is the number of times that the nominee often says, I can't answer that. I'm not going to go there. I could have to touch those issues when I reach the bench. We'll see a lot of that today, and I see the judge has just taken her seat, and I heard the gavel, Diane.
All right, she sure has. They're getting started. Let's listen in on today's confirmation hearing.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.